Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, world. This is the Gospel according to Dr. Roger, with me, Roger Gewolb, coming to you live from TNT Live with my two guests, Basil Valentine and Bishop Dewar. Each week on this program, we examine all the issues and debates of the week, and we ask our illustrious guests to debate them. Try not to fight too much, but we don't ask that too much. We like a good argument. And this week, we're going to talk about a very hot topic. We're going to talk about, as so many others have, the situation in the Middle East, Hamas and Israel. And I'm going to begin by asking each of you, Kai and Basil. Let's begin with you, Basil. Tell us a bit about yourself and your particular background, interest, and qualifications to talk about this very explosive subject.
Neutral observer. I'm political editor here at today's News Talk. So obviously international relations are always to the fore, and nowhere more so than the Middle East, because it's a situation that's been rumbling on since before I was born in the early 1960s. I visited Israel in the 1970s, and at that time, although we saw soldiers on the street, it was a relatively calm situation. That was in about 1973. Interestingly enough, I'm not Jewish, but my sisters both have olive skin. And we went up to go to the Temple Mount, to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they were both apprehended by what I think were Jordanian or UN guards, and asked if they were Jewish, because if they had been, they wouldn't have been permitted access to the Al-Aqsa compound. As a small boy, I thought that was extraordinary. I couldn't understand that at all. But we've come a long way since then. Of course, now the Al-Aqsa compound is regularly invaded by extremists wanting to destroy it and build a third temple. Worshippers are regularly shot and beaten and all the rest of it. And the deterioration of the situation there over the last 50 years has been absolutely tragic. I think we would all agree on that. My perspective is that I'd like to see the same application of universal human rights and suffrage that we have everywhere else in the world. Where all people are treated equally under the law and have the right to representation in their parliament and so on and so forth, and can start to build lives of peace and prosperity.
Kai, what about you?
Thank you, Roger, and good morning, Basil. I am Bishop Dewar. I'm a Pentecostal bishop here in the United Kingdom. I have been doing lay and ordained ministry for 33 years this coming November. I'm now at an age where I'm beginning to feel every one of those years as well. And I have worked ecumenically amongst various different denominations in the UK for the last 20 years, intrinsically working in the political environment as well. Like Basil, have been to Israel. I've been several times. I think my last trip there was just a few years ago. I've seen some sites whilst I've been there. I've had the extraordinary opportunity to be in both the occupied West Bank, as it's referred to, and Gaza on my second trip to Israel. And I would like to see a peace accord reached in the coming days to bring a ceasefire between Gaza and Israel, but I am not optimistic of that happening. So having worked with the Jewish community and various other faith communities, as well as the ethnic communities within the UK outside of my own ethnicity, my real approach is to see what we in the Christian church refer to as the love of Christ and the grace of God abound in all things, and the protection of human dignity and human life for every society.
Thank you. Let's begin. Let me ask you a question. This weekend, we have an extraordinary set of demonstrations going on here all over the UK in different cities. They appear rather different than the demonstrations we've been having for the last 9 months, probably different people saying different things. These tend to be your basic, ordinary British people saying, as it's been said, enough is enough. We've had enough of this. We're sick of this. You know, I love this country because I've been here a long time, because it's so tolerant. You can live here with all your eccentricities, pardon me, and, you know, people will smile wryly and let you get on with it. But the Brits, when they've had enough and they blow, oh my goodness, there's nothing like that. And it feels to me like this weekend and this past week, we've sort of reached that point. Now, how do you conflate, both of you, please, if at all, what's going on this weekend with what has been going on all these previous weekends? Is there any correlation? Is there any causal effect that you see? Basil?
Well, when you say all these previous weekends, are you talking about the pro-peace marches organized by Palestine Solidarity?
Pro-Palestine marches, yes.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, obviously, they're completely different. Hundreds of thousands of people marched on the streets of London on several occasions to bring an end to the genocide. Those marches were deliberately misconstrued by the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman somehow as hate marches, as if you want to stop the mass slaughter of innocent women, children, and men, for that matter, you're somehow hateful. I mean, it's really sinister stuff, if you ask me. What we're seeing this weekend are underlying fears, issues around mass migration into Britain. Over the last 10 years or so, Britain's population has gone up by several million people, most of them arriving in the country legally, many, of course, arriving illegally via small boats across the Channel. And yet, you know, it came out in Brexit, in the huge votes for Brexit, particularly in northern working class communities, and also the election of Boris Johnson and the collapse of the so-called Red Wall, that basically a lot of British people, particularly what are generally referred to as white working class people, felt that they hadn't been heard by the metropolitan elites in Westminster for decades. And that is indeed the case. You know, the Labour Party, long since divorced from its working class or trade union roots, has now become an entirely sort of self-serving, technocratic, globalist, top-down organisation. The Conservative Party had only ever been interested in working people at best from a sort of one-nation patrician point of view. So these people felt they've had no political home.
No correlation between the two.
No, I'm getting to that point, Roger. Now, as a result, partly of the frustration and anger at things like the Rochdale child abuse scandals, which involved lots of Muslim men, and other similar stories, which had been suppressed by the media because of their religious and racial content. This has only served to build up that sort of anger and resentment, because if issues aren't tackled at source and they're all swept under the carpet, then people start to get very angry. What we're now seeing, certainly from the likes of agitators like Tommy Robinson, is an attempt to somehow tie Israel's attempted erasure of Palestine and the Palestinian people with underlying fears of Islam in the UK. The two have nothing to do with each other. The Middle East is all about land and human rights, self-determination and sovereignty. And as we've seen from Benjamin Netanyahu speaking in Congress, he's attempting to frame it as some sort of East v West battle, and that they're fighting our fight. And if we don't beat the Muslims in Palestine, then they'll be killing you on your doorsteps in Bolton or wherever. That's utterly mendacious and frankly very sinister.
Right. Thank you, Kai. So Basil identifies as a neutral observer, and yet he talks about genocide and
well, of course, because the International Court of Justice have talked about genocide, Roger. Well, you can't sit here, you know. Sorry, we have international institutions for a reason.
Let me address Kai, please, with the question. There are people, you must admit, who don't call this genocide, and the International Court of Justice has been questioned about an awful lot of things. But you referred to genocide, and you said these were not hate marches, although it's been widely reported that there were swastikas and kill the Jews and
No,
all
it
sorts of
hasn't. Stop making stuff up again. We can't have a serious discussion if you're just going to repeat
I'm not making anything up. I'm referring to what's in the reports in the media, which everybody has seen.
Oh, the corporate media. We can always rely on them, can't we, Roger?
There have certainly been instances reported and videos seen of elements within the marches that may not have represented the mass of people at the marches who were there to advocate for Palestinian peace, but those marches became very hateful and certainly scared many Jews and many Muslims, and had quite an effect. So I wouldn't say that they were absolutely not hate marches. You also refer to the erasure of the Palestinians. So that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion, but those don't sound particularly neutral to me. And I wanted to ask Kai for his view again on the question of whether these two things are related. I think you make a very interesting point, Basil, in how they are related in the sense that the problems in the Middle East have fueled at least some of what's going on in the streets this weekend. Kai, over to you, please.
Roger, I would agree with the last statement that you made. I think a lot of tension in the Middle East is also giving rise to some of the tension that we've seen here in the United Kingdom. Now, I don't know whether Basil has actually been to any of these pro-Palestine rallies. I actually went to one myself as an observer, one that took place down in Cardiff Bay. When you hear chants of "F the Jews, every Zionist is a racist, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," I'd hardly call that a peace rally or a peace protest.
I've got to stop you at that point. First of all,
Basil, I'm going to stop you because we're not going to get anywhere if we interrupt each other. Please let Kai finish, then I'll come to you.
Okay.
You see, Basil, I can talk from my personal experience of what I heard, what I witnessed. That's what I'm conveying. This is not a generalization of what I've seen in the media. This is what I've seen with my own eyes, heard with my own ears. Yesterday in Cardiff Bay, where the police issued a Section 35 and Section 60 public disbursement order, once again, an anti-racism guised rally was allowed to take place in spite of those public orders being in place, where once again the cries of "F the Jews," every Zionist is a racist, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, were not only heard by people in attendance, were videoed and placed on social media. You can't deny what is there. Now, the simple fact of the matter is, I'm tired of hearing about genocide and these things because it's convenient to fuel a particular narrative. When it comes to the sovereignty of Israel, Palestine has no legal sovereign claim to the land. Israel has fought 3 defensive wars, won every single one of them, and following those defensive wars, ceded territory back. The simple fact of the matter is, in Gaza and in Palestine, you have a group of people, not every person, but a group of people that want the absolute genocide of another nation so that they can claim territory. You do
indeed, Kai. And those people are in the Israeli government, and they've been absolutely open and honest about that they want to basically ethnically cleanse the rest of
Somebody else speak and have their say.
Well, because if people just come out with outright lies and falsehoods and
like
very
you
obvious.
Did. But neither Roger nor I interrupted you.
Can I just interject? Can I just interject and say something? I mean, there's a lot of arguments both ways, but there's some hard facts. I mean, there are some things people have to look at. The synagogue in Gaza, the Jewish synagogue in Gaza, which is still there today, was established in the year, I think it was 508 BC. Or AD, I can't remember. But in any event, 200 years before Islam even existed.
Yeah, so, the religion is irrelevant, Roger. It's where the people
but the
come
point
from.
Is the Jews were there at the time. The original Canaanites were there. I mean, Kai is the Bible man. He'll tell you that. Yeah. So a lot of this stuff that's cited is simply not correct. But let's go back to the question of whether what's happening on the streets this weekend with people arguing with each other, the way you two are doing very admirably, I like it, whether it's related to what's going on in the Middle East. You finish, Kai, please.
Yeah, okay, finish and then I'll come back.
I have to say, now, having been at the rally in Trafalgar Square on the 27th, I have to say, I think that certain factors within the protests and the violence that we've seen are trying to bring the two issues together. The underlying issue of what's happening in the United Kingdom at the moment is successive governments for the last however many years. I can't limit it just to my lifetime, although within my lifetime we've seen the true rise of it, have not addressed the issue of illegal immigration, of mass immigration, with a sufficient resolve that has given the British public a sense of well-being, in my opinion, as to the government's ability to handle the situation. We have seen, and we cannot deny, we have seen over and over again for at least 10 or 15 years, the rise of Islamic fundamentalism on the shores of the United Kingdom that has led people to frame an idea of the larger group of the Islamic community. And I have to say, when you look statistically, they say it's only 15 to 25% of the Islamic community worldwide believe in this form of fundamentalist Sharia law-esque kind of Islam. I know genuine Muslim believers that practice their faith openly, and they are some of the nicest people that I know. One is my optician, him and his father, who's an imam, incredible man, does not advocate for the violence that we see. So there's violence inherent in every side of the argument, and it's a minority of people that are trying to hijack this. It's still
a hell of a lot of people.
Well, if you look statistically,
but you're quite right.
25%. That's a
lot of people.
Scale. That's 380 million people we're talking about.
There's a lot of
globally.
People, but I mean, I must say, I have Muslim friends who, in the last 6 months, have said they almost don't like going out because white Brits glare at me. They say I don't like it. You know, it's not good.
And unfortunately, that's happened because, as we've seen, right, just in the last week with the protests, you have the actions of a minority of people within those protests that the government has now labeled everybody involved in that as far-right thugs, right? And you have a minority of Islamic believers globally that believe in this kind of jihadist Islam. And then we as a people globally have a tendency to tar everybody with the same brush, and that cannot be the case. And being a Christian and a minister, I advocate for common sense in this. You cannot label everybody the same way because there are genuine people out there. You know, I listen to people talking about, to go back to the question in some way, you know, crying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Which Palestine? Because there are Palestinian Jews, there are Palestinian Arabs. Which Palestinians are we talking about?
Okay, thank you. Basil, over to you.
Okay, do we not have to go to a break now, Roger?
Any moment, but you carry on until...
okay, well, a couple of things. First of all, with respect to the chants, obviously nobody wants to hear F the Jews. With regard to from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. What that refers to is the creation of a single state, one person, one vote for all Jews, Muslims and Christian living within the area of historic Palestine. It's as simple as that. You may be shaking your head, but that's what it means. It isn't a call for genocide or anything like that. It's extremely sinister to try and overlay that interpretation on that chant.
Okay, hold that thought. We're going to a break. Sorry to cut you off. We're going to a break, as you presciently said, and we'll be right back.
For a complete list of shows and our schedule offered on TNT, simply visit our website at tnt.news, keeping you in the loop on today's news talk, TNT.
Welcome back to The Gospel According to Dr. Roger, with me, Roger Gewolb, and my guests, Bishop Kai Dewar and Basil Valentine. And we are discussing the very important topic of the Middle East, Hamas, Israel, Gaza. Let's move on to another question. I think a very important question. People, prominent figures, and major organizations around the world are demanding a ceasefire. Political parties, Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, came out, I think it was yesterday, and said, that's it. I absolutely demand a ceasefire in his silken language, of course. And everybody's asking for a ceasefire. We tried this last week, but we only got so far as to be told, well, the two parties need to sit down and speak to each other, almost speak to each other nicely. Well, I don't see that happening in the near future. So the question I want to ask both of you is, how do you have this immediate ceasefire that David Lammy and all kinds of other politicians trying to make points for themselves and world leaders and spiritual leaders and everybody else are demanding? How do you have a ceasefire when one of the adversarial parties says they're not going to cease firing, they're not going to lay down their arms, and in fact, they're going to attack you and do an October 7th or whatever over and over again the next day? How do you have a ceasefire with a situation like that? Kai?
Roger, I don't think the two parties could ever reach agreement on a ceasefire. We've had multiple attempts at ceasefire negotiations hosted by both the Egyptians and negotiated by the Qataris. Like you rightly said, it's very difficult to create ceasefire negotiations with somebody that refuses to lay down their arms, refuses to...
Just a second. We're getting into some fantasy stuff again here. I mean, first of all...
Basil, please, let him finish, please. Come on, mate.
Okay,
we're not going to have a good discussion otherwise.
So for the sake of Basil and my quote-unquote fantasy stuff, at the time we're on the air now, if I'm not very much mistaken, an Israeli-led delegation is either on its way to Cairo or has arrived in Cairo for the purpose of ceasefire negotiations. Something that Hamas have said they have no intention of agreeing to is smoke and mirrors and is an Israeli ploy. That's a good starting point for peace negotiations. All over this situation, Hamas have repeatedly argued that they don't want a ceasefire. What they want, and whether Basil likes it or not, it is founded in their religious ideology, is the absolute eradication of the Jewish state. Doesn't matter how many people are in there, doesn't matter whether it's Palestinian Jews or Israeli Jews, Hamas want Israel wiped off the map as a people. That is what they have hijacked from the river to the sea to mean. That is what it now means when you see Hamas supporters shouting it, irrespective of its political roots back in the 60s. The reality is, unless you see other forces placed in Gaza and Israel to force a ceasefire, there will not be a ceasefire between these two parties, especially not when you've got Iran backing Hamas and once again calling for the eradication of the Jewish state.
And throwing Hezbollah at them also, I guess. Basil, let me ask you a question, sir. Let's assume the moment this program is over, your front doorbell rings, and you open the door, and standing there are Bibi Netanyahu and Yahya Sinwar. And they say, Basil, we've come to you because you're the only political analyst that can help us. Please plan this ceasefire. Tell us what to do. What would you say to them?
Well, I mean, I'd immediately call the police and have Netanyahu arrested as a war criminal, which he is. But to come to what Bishop Dewar was saying, you're obviously not following the news reports.
No, sorry. Can you answer my question?
Well, I told you I'd have Netanyahu arrested. He belongs in jail.
Well,
it's as simple as
fine.
that.
And he'd say to the policeman, officer, would you give me a minute to speak with Mr. Valentine before you take me away? And the policeman would say, sure. And then they'd ask you the question again. And they say, Mr. Valentine, we've come to you because you're so illustrious. Tell us how to do this ceasefire, please. Tell us now.
Well, it's very simple, really. You just stop the bombing. Even this morning, Israel has been bombing displaced people in tents in the yard of the Al-Aqsa hospital.
Okay, so Israel, number one, let me just do this bullet points. Number one, you forgive the pun. Number one, Israel stops the bombing. What's next?
Right. Well, then that's the ceasefire, isn't it? It's as simple as that. 99.999% of all the ordnance in that recent massacres has been dropped by the Israelis, more than twice the amount of explosives that were dropped on Hiroshima. One side has got some small arms and some rockets, and the other side is absolutely armed to the teeth. We're talking about the Lancet. Go on.
So even though their materiel, their armaments are perhaps less powerful, you're saying that Israel stops bombing and Hamas
if
keeps
Israel
firing
stops,
missiles
no,
into
Israel.
Israel.
If Israel, the Hamas have been desperate for a ceasefire for a long time because their people have been suffering so badly. Israel has repeatedly rejected ceasefire proposals, including their own ceasefire proposals, with Netanyahu and his negotiators often inserting fresh conditions.
It's reported that Hamas has refused 17 ceasefire proposals.
But I don't know where
Hamas with the Palestinians.
No, I don't know where you're getting your information from. That's absolute 100%.
So you're saying Hamas would lay down their arms the minute Israel said we're not bombing anymore?
When you say lay down their arms, I don't know whether you mean permanently or not, but in terms of stopping the horrendous slaughter that's been going on for the last 9 months, the most unchristian slaughter imaginable. I mean, aren't you, Bishop, you're supposed to be about forgiveness in the Christian religion?
So are you saying that Hamas? Are you saying that if Israel stopped attacking Gaza, Hamas would stop attacking Israel?
In the short term, yes. Obviously, there needs to be a more permanent political solution than just simply that.
How long is the short term?
Israel has made it absolutely clear that they have no intention of stopping killing people until supposedly Hamas is completely destroyed.
Not killing.
What does that look like?
People killing Hamas.
Well, they've killed 200,000 people. This is ridiculous stuff. They've killed tens of thousands of children.
Come on,
I don't know where that figure.
But
so you're not really answering the question.
The Lancet magazine estimate the number of dead to be 186,000.
Yeah, if Israel, it's a simple question, sir. If Israel lays down its arms in a ceasefire, will Hamas lay down its arms? I think that would be wonderful, but will they?
Well, I'm given to believe that they are, more in favor of an immediate ceasefire than the Israeli negotiators who have been acting in bad faith for months.
Yeah, but you haven't answered me. Will they put down their arms? Or
well, I can't speak for them. I'm not a member.
So how are you going to have a ceasefire? Why are people demanding a ceasefire if nobody can speak for one of the combatants that they will stop fighting?
Right. And why can nobody speak for one of the combatants? Because Israel just assassinated him, Ismail Haniyeh. I mean, how are they supposed to make peace with an Israeli regime that's assassinating their own political leadership on a regular basis? Israel's behaving like a psychopathic murderer. It's as simple as that. It's murdered people in Lebanon, Iran, and Gaza, all within the space of a week.
Okay.
So, seeing as you want to talk about psychopathic individuals, please tell me what kind of individual stabbed 2 pensioners to death this morning, Palestinian, stabbed 2 Israeli pensioners walking down the street, which I believe they were just walking past the gas station, seriously injured 2 others. None of those little elements get reported, do they? It's always Israel the aggressor. You want to attack me because Israel is the aggressor.
Well, I'm attacking you because you don't seem to have any faith. You said you couldn't see a way that a ceasefire could be brought about. What an utterly faithless and depressing statement, Bishop.
You haven't,
Roger. This is what happens.
Hold on, Kai. Hold on. But to be fair, Basil, neither have you. You've said you can't speak for them. You've no idea whether they.
No, of course I can't speak for Hamas. I'm not a member of Hamas.
This is the thing that makes me so perplexed. All the people demanding a ceasefire, and I want one too. But how do you know that they won't turn around and wipe out Israel again 5 minutes later?
Wipe out Israel. There's a little danger of that,
Just for the record, in response to Basil, who said that I couldn't see a ceasefire, of the 2 of us commentating on this, I'm the only one that said the only way I can see a ceasefire happening is by an additional force coming in to moderate between the 2.
Well, the Israelis would never allow that. I think the UN should have been involved months ago. UN peacekeepers on the ground.
If anybody was going to go in and eliminate Hamas, it should have been the UN.
I don't know about eliminating Hamas, but certainly we could have had UN peacekeepers in there months ago. We should have UN peacekeepers in the West Bank now, quite frankly, after the ICJ ruling that all these Israeli settlements are illegal, something we've always known. We should have the UN in the West Bank protecting the Palestinians who are regularly attacked. Or do you deny that too, Bishop Dewar?
Which Palestinians?
In the West Bank.
See, I've been in the West Bank. You haven't. Which Palestinians are you talking about? You're talking about the Palestinian Jews? You're talking about the Palestinian Arabs? Which ones are you referring to?
Palestinian natives in the West Bank, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And you know the fact that
and I know Jews, Palestinian Jews born in the West Bank. I've been there just a few years ago, went to see them, attacked for living in the West Bank, refusing to leave under the settlement agreement.
Okay,
so
we're going to take a short break, gentlemen. Short break. We'll be right back with this riveting discussion. Thank you so much. Welcome back to The Gospel According to Dr. Roger, with me, Dr. Roger Gewolb, and my two guests, Bishop Kai Dewar and Basil Valentine. And we are hot on the subject of Gaza, Hamas, Israel. And back to you, Kai. You were just starting to talk about whether a ceasefire is possible. Everybody is demanding one, but how in the world does it come about?
Well, I think genuinely there has to be some form of interjection by the UN with a view to putting troops on the ground. Whether Israel agrees to it or Hamas agree to it is irrelevant. At this point, the only way to bring a ceasefire, to me, as I interpret the situation, as I go through the things I read, talk to people I know in Israel, close to the West Bank as well, on the other side, and hear what they're telling me, things that we don't see reported in the media. The only way to see a ceasefire at the moment is a forced ceasefire. The two parties will not agree, whatever the reasons are, whether the reports of 17 rejections of peace talks, whether this hosting of both parties in Cairo over this weekend and however long this goes on for comes to pass. I genuinely cannot see the two opposing forces, Israel or Hamas, or especially not with Hezbollah injecting themselves from the north. I cannot see a peace agreement and a ceasefire being achieved without an additional military peacekeeping presence in the region. And the danger of that then is it stokes tension amongst other nations as to how far this would go, and potentially has a knock-on effect there. But between the two, purely from a political standpoint, from a religious ideology standpoint, they're never going to agree. They're just not going to find peace.
Okay. Basil?
Yeah, I mean, in principle, I don't disagree with what Bishop Dewar has said. Unfortunately, it's not on the table as far as, the current arrangements at the United Nations are. Nobody's really talking about an international peacekeeping force at the moment. So it's, not really anything anybody's considering. What we can hope, of course, the only realistic way of achieving a ceasefire is to turn off the weapons supply to Israel. It wouldn't surprise me. I hope that we see other UK government officials in the dock in the coming months for their complicity in genocide. That's what the Geneva Conventions state. And the Americans could, of course, bring an end to the killing relatively quickly. All nations would be able to if we impose the same sanctions on Israel that we did on South Africa to bring an end to the apartheid regime there. But that, that would be anti-Semitic.
You're casting Israel as the wrongdoer here, although it's they that was attacked.
Well, it's the one. Israel is the one. Israel is the one that's dumping tons of.
If I can finish, you're casting Israel as the wrongdoer here, but that's almost irrelevant for the question I'm going to ask. You're basically advocating that one side, once again, you're advocating one side lay down its arms. If they stop giving Israel weapons, Israel stops doing this. How about Hamas? What if Hamas comes back and attacks again? What are the Israelis supposed to do?
When you say one side lays down its arms, one side has F-16 fighter jets, were they up to nuclear weapons? So when you say, it's a bit like, it's a misleading
if they have an
statement.
atom bomb, it doesn't matter. If they stop fighting while the other side carries on, how is that a ceasefire?
No, we've got to turn off the weapons supplied to the perpetrator of the genocide, Israel. It's as simple as that. They've killed nearly 200,000.
It's that kind of rhetoric that causes the problem. We're not seeing the perpetration of a genocide. We're not seeing apartheid. Both of those have been.
Why do you not respect international law? Why do you know? Everybody says it's apartheid. We know it's apartheid.
Just because everybody says it's apartheid doesn't
all the
make it
international
apartheid.
organizations.
Everybody in the UK is calling the riots at the moment far-right thugs. Doesn't make everybody a far-right thug. Language in a situation like this is key. And
let me bring
down the rhetoric helps here.
Yeah.
Let me bring you back away from the language, because it's just words, to the facts. Again, for the umpteenth time, this is the second week in a row I've tried to do this. How do you have a ceasefire if one side is not going to cease firing? Can't somebody answer that question?
Well, it's the Israelis that refuse to stop firing. They've made it very obvious.
No, you're obfuscating. If the Israelis stop firing, Hamas have said they won't stop firing. So how do you have this ceasefire that everybody is screaming for? The Archbishop of Canterbury, who I know, who is a wonderful man, says, I want a ceasefire now. Good. He can't answer the question. If he can't answer the question, I'd at least expect that Basil Valentine could really well answer it. How do you stop the war? How do you stop the ceasefire? Genocide, schmenocide, I don't care all these labels. The point is, two groups are fighting. How do you stop them if one of them says, not only will I not stop, I'm going to go back and do this triple tomorrow?
Well, the international community has to put the required amount of pressure on both sides, but in my view, particularly,
but they've done that. They've done that.
They haven't put anything like enough pressure on the Israelis.
Well, then you're agreeing with Kai that the UN has to send in a peacekeeping force.
Well, if they could, but they're not talking about doing that at the moment, so that's why.
But so you agree with Guy, the two of you, after all this, after all of this, the two of you who I think to have a hell of a knockdown fight are agreeing with each other, for goodness sake.
Well,
to me, Roger and Basil, the only way a ceasefire happens in this situation is the international community has to go beyond sanctions and actually send in a peacekeeping force. It is never going to happen. There has to be a laying down of arms on both sides. Basil talked about stopping the flow of weapons to Israel. All right, so how do you intend to stop the flow of weapons, whether it's small armaments or massive missiles, from Iran to Hamas?
I can't believe you just said that.
Lay down their arms, small, large, whatever the size, unless there is an agreement by both sides to lay down their arms, there will not be a ceasefire without an international peacekeeping force.
You've got to bear in mind the asymmetry of the situation. This is the key point. People always talk about a conflict, but this side, that side. Israel has the backing of the most powerful country in the world, in the United States, referred to as ironclad, only last week, and that can get away with murder, which it does on a regular basis in several different countries. I mean, the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the head of the political wing of Hamas, while in Iran, this is a major and completely unnecessary, provocative escalation. The Iranians are talking about obviously retaliating. It's extreme embarrassment that somebody should be assassinated on their own soil while attending the inauguration of the new president. And then they also murdered the same day, they murdered a Hezbollah commander in Lebanon as well, of course, as Lebanese civilians. They don't count to the Israelis, of course, because they don't regard anybody other than their own kind as being worthy in any way, shape or form. So you've got a mad dog in Israel, basically attacking all its neighbors, seemingly with impunity, and then still playing the victim card. We've seen it for decades.
How do you call yourself a neutral observer when you speak like this?
Well, I mean, I've come to my conclusions on my standpoint.
Why don't you just be honest and come out and
I've come to the position I have from the stance of neutrality. In other words, I've managed to break free of the very heavy conditioning that we all get in the West in favor of Israel. I mean, people are basically, mind controlled into believing all sorts of falsehoods and going along with a fundamentally racist and genocidal ideology.
You don't think the conditioning in the West is rather the other way around?
No, absolutely not.
How about the fact that Vladimir Putin bombs a children's hospital in Ukraine that has no military complement, no nothing inside of it? Nobody goes out on the street One journalist in Fleet Street said, "No Jews, no news." I mean, where in the world do you get
and as a result, Russia,
Israel?
As a result, Russia has been sanctioned. There are no Russian athletes at the Olympics, but there are Israeli athletes at the Olympics, and Israel is still supposed to be our great friend in spite of the fact that as a result of its actions, a child has his leg amputated without anesthetic every hour and has done so for months, Bishop.
So
do you call that self-defense?
Basil, can I ask you a question?
Basil, am virulently anti-Netanyahu and anti-Israel. Don't call yourself neutral, because you're not. Kai, go on.
Can I ask you? I genuinely want to ask a question. Do you know the layout of Israel as a landmass, the placing of the cities?
Yeah, I've got a fairly decent idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know where the town of Sfat is?
No, please tell me.
Okay, so Sfat is a town in the north, up in the mountains, near the Golan Heights. I've sat in Sfat. I've watched Hezbollah rockets coming round the mountains from Lebanon, targeting innocent civilian targets. Nothing to do with Netanyahu, nothing to do with the IDF, nothing, just random. I've had friends of mine call me. I was on the phone with one Messianic rabbi. All of a sudden, there's an explosion in the background. I said to him, "Is everything all right?" He said, "Oh yeah, it's a rocket's just landed on the kids' playground, about 400 yards away from me." This wasn't whilst Hamas is claiming to retaliate and post October 7th last year. This was just 3 or 4 years ago. Random guy, a friend of mine, walking down the street. I've watched with my own eyes, Hezbollah rockets coming round the mountains from Lebanon. Are you going to tell me that this is what we're seeing now? This is all Israel's fault. You really want to play that card?
All these problems would be solved by the creation of a single unitary state over the whole of historic Israel and Palestine.
How do you create a single unitary state with a people
with one person, one vote, and universal human rights? It's as simple as that. Palestinians are disadvantaged in the basic laws of Israel dozens and dozens and dozens of times.
That they need to apply universal human rights. They don't even recognize the rights that you're claiming.
Roger, help us out here. We've reached an impasse.
Well, I think that, it's obviously a very difficult situation, but Kai is right in that all the proxies of Iran, and we mustn't forget Iran behind all this, and we mustn't also forget all of those people in those pro-Palestinian marches out there mustn't forget that everybody else is next. The Jews and Israel are simply the canary in the mine. Everybody who is an infidel and is hated by that extremist wing of Islam, that is not to say that the bulk of Muslims are that way, but that extremist wing wants to get rid of all of us. And the Jews are first. The Jews go, and then they come for you, Basil, So that's what's going on here. And to portray it as genocide and otherwise, and I mean, you could argue all day, it's going to go on through eternity. Nobody's going to settle it, but it would be great to have a ceasefire. But I come back to my basic question. How do you have a ceasefire with a party that is not going to cease firing? And if that's the case,
and I come
what
back
do you do next to stop all the carnage?
Well, I come back to the point that the side that doesn't want a ceasefire is Israel. They've made it clear that they seek the total destruction of Hamas, right down to the last T-boy and the T-boy's brother. And that's sort of a semi-physical impossibility because, of course, the biggest recruiting sergeant for Hamas over the last 9 months has been Israel. And it's mass, indiscriminate slaughter.
But you're not answering. You're not answering the question. You're shifting the blame to the wrong party. How do you get Hamas to stop fighting?
Well, I think a step in the right direction would be if we had some vision from world leaders for a permanent solution, put it that way. Now, the British and American politicians still cling to the mantra.
What does that mean? Our world leaders can't even give us a bloody vision for how to get through tomorrow in this country. They're so useless.
True, but, the intractable situation in the Middle East, obviously the official position of the State Department, of the Foreign Office, and the European Union is that there should be a two-state solution, one state for the Palestinians and one state for Israel. But of course, nobody's prepared to take the steps necessary to bring that about, because
Kai, Netanyahu and Sinwar have just showed up at your front door, and they said, "Okay, well, Basil can't tell us. Tell us what to do, quick."
You lay down your arms, we talk, or the UN sends a peacekeeping force in. End of. It's the only way it happens.
Agree, Basil?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's what they've been trying to get them to do for a long time. But as I say, my understanding of the situation
there's no threat of the UN sending a peacekeeping force in.
No, I know there's no threat. I know there's no threat of that. That's not. Nobody's talking about that. That's not on the table at the moment. But my understanding is that the Israelis.
I think we can both agree we're now at the point in the Israel-Gaza conflict that unless there is a peacekeeping force brought in, there isn't going to be a permanent solution. You talked about a permanent solution in this thing. How do you address a permanent solution with a religious ideology that refuses to acknowledge both the existence of a people and desires the absolute?
You're talking about. I take it you're talking about Zionism, because it's the Zionists who very openly these days talk about the total eradication of Palestine. I mean, you know what Ben Gvir and that are like. And why are you pretending otherwise? They are Zion
why
fascists.
Do you say he represents the Zionists? He's an extreme.
Well, but that's now the mainstream. There are protests. There have been protests outside with a detention facility where they've arrested Israeli soldiers for torturing Palestinians. Israeli society is deeply sick at the moment. The idea that we'd all sit around in a kumbaya, in a kibbutz, that's ancient history. We've seen
deeply sick, is it? Like Hamas were when they invaded Israel on October the 7th, and against the Geneva
They invaded Israel. They invaded Israel originally to take hostages that they could bargain for some of the hostages in the Israeli torture gulag. It's as simple as that. Now, that all went wrong.
Do you know there's an American?
I'm telling you why they did it. I'm not justifying.
There's an American guys. There's an American senator. I think it was Lindsey Graham. I can't remember. He said when talking about this recently, he said, if Mexico invaded Texas and killed 1,200 people, and then on the way back to Mexico, they went to the University of Texas at Austin, and they grabbed a couple hundred students and kidnapped them and brought them back to Mexico. Do you know that the next day the Republic of Mexico would be an irradiated parking lot?
Well, I mean, that's psychotic anyway, that kind of talk, isn't it? Absolutely psychotic. A much better parallel is the north of Ireland, where, of course, the provisional IRA committed all sorts of atrocities, including on the British mainland, but we did not bomb the Catholic areas of Northern Ireland to smithereens, and we did not assassinate Gerry Adams and Martin McLaughlin. On the contrary, we sat down and we finally got a peace agreement. The Israeli response was very different, obviously.
We flattened Dresden in World War II.
Yeah, that's different. Well, I'm talking about Northern Ireland, which was a similarly sectarian situation to that in Israel. The world wars are
They're not
totally
even
irrelevant.
Close. How you can compare the Northern Ireland conflict as a sectarian war with a sectarian war in Israel and the Middle East? They're not even close. They're not even comparable.
Well,
that is just
the IRA was okay. So you regard Hamas as terrorist, and the IRA were regarded as terrorists.
No, I don't regard Hamas as terrorist. The international community has prescribed Hamas as terrorists.
Okay, and the IRA and the IRA were terrorists.
I need to respect international law. Perhaps you want to respect international law.
And the IRA. The designation is not the same thing as international law, but anyway, the IRA were terrorists, right? So both Hamas and IRA terrorists, okay? And they both killed innocent civilians of the country they were targeting, right? Didn't they? The IRA killed innocent British people, and Hamas have killed innocent Israelis. So the response of the British government was to make peace with the IRA, wasn't it? The British government did not bomb Dublin to smithereens, did not bomb the Catholic areas of Belfast to smithereen, did not massacre tens of thousands of
Basil,
Irish Catholics.
With the greatest respect, you're leaving out one teeny tiny detail. The IRA never claimed that Britain has no right to exist and that its goal was to eradicate every British citizen.
Well, no, but that's a
yeah.
You're inserting.
Well, that's it right there.
You're inserting. Yeah, I mean, that's one interpretation. I don't think it's entirely fair to say that.
It's not an interpretation. It's in their charter, for goodness sake.
Yeah, I mean, look,
Am I wrong,
is supposed to be. Kai, it's the central message.
Unfortunately, Basil is trying to ignore the religious element of what Hamas and Hezbollah
let's talk about the religious element.
It's a fundamental core tenet of what they believe and what they stand for. Their fight. Sorry to inform you, Basil, their fight is not political. Their fight is based in this absolute archaic 7th century religious ideology.
You seem to have an even more archaic ideology. It is based on a struggle for land, self-determination, and freedom. As a Christian, it's not the.
Sorry, as a Christian, they've got a 4,000-year-old claim that predates the formation of Palestine as a state. Thanks for answering the question.
As a Christian, is the central message of Christianity not forgiveness? How can you possibly ally yourself with an Israeli regime that show no interest whatsoever in peace and reconciliation, and instead have invoked the Old Testament to bring about genocide? Why do you endorse
no.
Jewish supremacists,
you're the one talking about land
claims on genocide?
You brought this up about land claims. Well, if it's purely based on a land claim,
Benjamin Netanyahu is from Poland. He has no genetic connection to the Middle East whatsoever.
Whoa, Basil, you're the one that brought up land claims. That was your claim. If you go to land claims, then biblical Israel predates Palestine by 4,000 years. Case closed. You lost your argument.
Then why don't we have the Romans come back to Britain? They were here a couple of thousand years ago, or perhaps the Vikings, or set up Danegeld again. You can't go back to historic political
guys. Gentlemen, on that note,
go back to your Bible, Bishop, and let some forgiveness.
On that note, the Romans invading Britain again. I want to thank you both very much for a really, really interesting and exciting debate. You both did very, very well. Thank you to our viewers and listeners. This is The World According to the Gospel According to Dr. Roger, with me, Roger Gewolb, and Basil Valentine, and Bishop Dewar.